find inspiration. Who do you say that I am? Well, right now, as you can see in this next slide, that is a big question for all of us today. That is a big question for our country. That is a big question for our Congress. That is a big question for Unity of Valley. And that is a big question for Unity as a whole. Because we are undergoing somewhat of an identity crisis. Who does this nation want to be in the world? Do we want to be the peaceful helper, or do we want to be the policeman occupier? Who do we want to be as a government? Well, you know that story. We have a gender crisis going on. What does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be female? A man and a woman. Well, even tomatoes having some trouble there. A crisis, however, is not a bad word. It simply means a decisive moment. It's critical. We come to a point where we have to make a decision. So today I'm going to speak from chapter 8 in the book of Mark, the story, running from verses 22 to 35. Beginning with, well, let's back up. Let's take a little bit of historical background and ask this question. Who are the Jews? Who are the Israelites? Well, what we know about them from reading the Old Testament is that they were a people who were ruled by kings. One king after another. And some of them were good, some of them bad. But all of them were believed to be appointed by God. They and God they were not a deity as the Egyptians gods were, and many other cultures considered their rulers to actually be the gods, but they were the right-hand man of God. So their dictates and their mandates came directly from the Almighty. It was a culture steeped in rules and regulations. You need to do this, don't do that. You need to do this, do this, do this, don't do that. Or else, because every rule and regulation had some kind of penalty to it. You're not clean for X number of hours, you're not clean for X number of days, you have to go outside the city and pick around in the garbage dump, which was called hell. So it's no wonder that it was also a culture that suffered a lot of illness. Because what happens when we constantly feel condemned? Have you ever worked in a job where all eyes were on you and you couldn't do anything right? And the more you did that happened to be wrong, though you did 99 things right, everybody notices that one thing. How do you feel? So then you start feeling a little bit less comfortable about yourself, and you tend to make a few more mistakes when you're under those circumstances. And when you make more mistakes, what happens? More condemnation. So we get more condemnation, we feel worse about ourselves, and what happens when we feel worse about ourselves? We get sick. So there was a lot of illness going on at the time. And if you've ever seen that movie, The Stoning of Sanjira, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce the name, you get a real good insight in how gruesome stoning was. And that's one of the penalties for some of these crimes, these sins, these falling short from the rules that were committed. So we also know that in the time of Jesus, the Romans were occupying the land. So even though they still had a pseudo-government, local governments in place, they were ruled by the Roman Empire. However, they were really lucky for being occupied. They were allowed to continue their culture, and they were allowed to continue their religion. So this is the environment that Jesus came up in. Okay, I want to say one more thing about the past with all the kings. They knew, and it will tell you in the Bible, that they knew that kingdomship was not the best form of government. But it said that for the hardness of your hearts, we're going to allow this. This is just the way it's going to be. However, they always predicted that someday would come that king to trump all kings. The King of Kings, because he would be the righteous one. He would be the one that would finally bring peace allow the country to maintain, for the people to have prosperity and happiness, and everybody's going to be doing the right thing, right? So they called this King of Kings the Messiah. Someday that Messiah is going to come. And another word for Messiah was Christo. And Christo meant the anointed one. So they're looking and looking and looking all these centuries for this anointed one to come along. Well, who was Jesus? We know that Jesus was a healer. He went around healing, and I learned, and through studying this, that it was common medical practice in the day to use the mud, to use the saliva. So he wasn't necessarily making these things up, but Jesus had another ingredient that was healing to the people, because there were winds of change beginning to come about at this time. And John the Baptist was part of that. And there, he's coming around saying, look, why don't we just allow us once and for all, let's dunk in the water, let some of that stuff roll away so we can just stand up and have another chance. So there's some hope for redemption. Well, what happened to him, they chopped off his head, but yeah, so that's what happened eventually. Jesus was following that same idea. He was a very intellectual person, intelligent, that is, and very knowledgeable. They say that Jesus, as a child, studied the scriptures. He knew the scriptures. He knew the rules. He knew the laws. He knew the punishments. He knew all the players. And they say it's possible that during some period of his life, he traveled to other countries and he learned about other religions as well. Maybe Eastern philosophies. So he was a man that questioned the status quo. Nonconformist. You know what? I don't really have to buy into all of this. All of these rules and the punishments that come along with them. So, John the Baptist, well, another way he plays in the picture here. In the chapter of Mark, verse 22, it's talking about him performing a healing. And people brought this blind man to him, and so they actually said, well, let's go out of the village. Because who's in the village? All the people that are condemning him. So they go out of the village, and Jesus puts his hands on his eyes, and he can see a little bit. He says, well, I can see, but I don't know who's there. Well, maybe that's what he wanted to know. Who's there? Are my accusers there? But when he was able to see that, no, I am surrounded by people who love me and they forgive me, he was able to see. And after he then regained his sight, Jesus told him, go home. Just go home. Don't even go back into that village. So he was traveling then with his disciples and the followers, because that's what they did. They went from place to place bringing this good news, this new idea. And along the way, Jesus asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And the reason he asked that, just another side note, is because in their tradition, they believed that people of greatness who did great things were a reincarnation of some archetype from the past who did great things. So the crowd answered, well, some people say that you're Elijah, come back. And some people said, no, you're one of the prophets. People are saying you're one of the prophets. And then other people are saying, you're John the Baptist, come back. Which is interesting, because they were cousins and they were cohorts. So John the Baptist hadn't been dead very long. So apparently they believed that these incarnations could happen at any point in time in their life. So, well, he says, okay, who do you say? You guys know me the best. Who do you say that I am? And Peter said, you're the Messiah. And Jesus said, wait a minute. Nuh-uh. Reality check. Jesus knew what was going on. He knew that there was clash and animosity coming. He could hear the knives sharpening in the hills, but he knew that's not the way. In fact, I don't think he even intended to really start a religion. He was just bringing a new idea, and much less wanting to become a king and set up a government or a kingdom for his people. So in the story, it says that he said, no, the Son of Man, capital S, capital M, a whole new talk there, but the Son of Man is going to suffer. The chiefs and the elders and the priests, they're going to reject this. You know, he used to be in pretty good favor with those guys because he was so interested in the religious ways, but he fell out of favor with all these antics he was pulling now. So he said that to the whole crowd, but then Peter said, pulled him aside. It's like, what are you saying? What are you talking about? These people are not down for suffering. They came in here for something great. We're following you around because we want something great. But Jesus responded to that by turning to the whole crowd, and he called Peter Satan. Now that's a capital S, because you know in allegories, when a certain attribute becomes a person, they always capitalize it. So, Satan simply meaning, if you look up the definition, accuser, or one who opposes. So, talk to the hand, Peter. Get in line. That's not the way it is. Get behind me, Satan, he said to Peter. So he did that in front of the whole crowd to rebuke him, to let the crowd know, I know what I'm talking about. I know what's going on in the world. I'm not blind here. I know they're going to come after me. They are not going to like what I'm doing. They already don't like what I'm doing. And if you go around saying I'm the Messiah, I'm going to be in big trouble. Okay? All right, I'd love to continue this story, but I need to stick to topic. So, who was, drum roll, who was Charles Fillmore? I would like to draw a parallel between the New Thought movement that has come up in the 19th century to the Winds and New Thought movement of the time of Jesus. The idea of redemption, we don't have to live by the rules that we bind ourselves in, and the New Thought movement, which took the power of belief in the healing of the self. So what was happening is our modern medical science was figuring out some things, why we were getting sick, and coming up with remedies and coming up with diagnoses, but it was very imperfect. So we found that the doctors or the physicians, whoever they happened to be, that people were coming to when they weren't feeling well, were giving them diagnoses. And what was happening is that people were believing the diagnoses, and just like when you believe you can't perform well in your job, you believe in the diagnosis and you get more sick and you get more sick and you get more sick. And maybe you will, but maybe that diagnosis was wrong. So some people started questioning, do I really need to believe that? Of course we know, as you spoke to recently, Myrtle was one of those people. Do I really have to believe I have tuberculosis? What if I could say, never mind that, I'm going to believe in my own health. I'm going to believe in the power of the healing of my own body. And so this became a widespread thought in positive thinking and allowing the natural forces to help us be positive and to heal ourselves. So people were healing. They were finding healing of body, they were finding healing of mind, they were finding healing of emotions, and it's just phenomenal. If you've never read about Thomas Quimby, it's an amazing story. So he was one of the first ones that decided, you know what, I'm going to do something about this illness. And from there, a whole movement started, this whole New Thought movement. Of course, we know it's branched off. There's some that are more scientific, some that are less, some that base themselves on religion, and some that don't. Well, Charles Fillmore, let's go back to him for a minute. Oh, that's still him. Okay. We saw his picture. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about him. I just learned last night he was born in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Rock on. He was the founder of Unity, and once again, he did not intend to start a religion. but because his ideas were so phenomenal, his writings were so amazing, his speeches were so influential that people wanted him to do something. You can't let this go. So he and his wife Myrtle, they founded Unity, where people could come, where they could be healed, where they could, connect with the power that is. He's written many books. It was his second wife who actually put all of his writings together in books. There's some really amazing stuff. He was a very intelligent man, brilliant, just like I suspect Jesus was. And he actually went back into the Bible, and he was able to see it as a history of the evolution of the consciousness of man in relationship to God. And he created a certain code, you might say, a way to overlay words with specific meanings. Some of it we already knew because it's allegorical to begin with, a lot of it. That he was able to do that in a way that we can go back and we can read any scripture, and then we can take our metaphysical dictionaries and we can insert certain words for other words, including numbers. Numbers are symbolic, they weren't literal. So he was able to kind of crack the code of what this all was about. And in addition, he realized that this amazing healing power that we're tapping into in the 20th century is the exact same power that Jesus talked about. The I am. So, yeah, he was a code cracker, not a cracker. That's what we call people in Florida. We call them crackers. All right. Well, let's. What does this have to do with us? Okay. What does it have to do with us? Well, Unity is undergoing a type of identity crisis because right now we're trying to decide, okay, are we going to drop Christian from our titles? Are we going to stop talking about Jesus? Some say yes, some say no. So I think the key is for us to realize what our roots are and what the real parallels are, so that it can be yes and yes, not one or the other. But then to really understand our own identity. Where do we come from? Why? Why are we Christian-based? How are we Christian-based? How is this universal power, which, by the way, is true, even if you've never heard of the Bible, that's why and how we can honor all religions. Because this power is true, no matter how you access it. So we can honor all religions and at the same time honor our own. Who are we? We are a positive community. We are a transformational movement. We are open-minded. We are Christian-based. We believe in spiritual oneness of the universe. And are we knowledgeable? Well, that's my charge to you today. If you've not read the book, the most popular book in the world, book for which nations have rose and fall, for which people have lived and died, have killed, that get their daily inspiration, we might want to know a little bit about where we're coming from. So, who do you say that I am? Who do we say that we are? That's the question for us to continue constantly to contemplate. In all of these ways. Global scene, on the national scene,